How's it going there, Golden Bears? Sorry this is so late. Went out for some events with my family earlier tonight, and my apologies again. Well, we are now looking at Chapter 7 from the AMSCO reading guide. I know it's a little bit longer, but boy, a crucial one to understand this revolution that Jefferson has brought. So on the first few pages, you see some maps. I want to have you turn to the third map, and let you jump in a little bit here on some thoughts. The bottom right-hand corner has this box that says, how did the Haitian Revolution impact this purchase? Well, essentially, I guess without control of Haiti, Napoleon really felt that he had no foothold or no opportunity or even maybe no use for this area of Louisiana. And he certainly did not want this to fall in the hands of the hated and detested British. So he sought and thought really a profit margin of about 3 cents an acre might be a doable thing for him. So that should help you with that box. We'll come back to the Haitian Revolution when I begin lecturing on that early next week. Going on to the first question on the analysis section there, you'll see the question asks, explain the significance of the Jefferson's repeal of the whiskey tax. Well, essentially it helped the farmers, and this is a perfect example of Jefferson's agrarian philosophy. Remember, he is there to help the farmer, not the merchant class that is emerging out of New England, but definitely the farmer's base. And we'll talk more about the significance of that in one of my lectures as to, because of the wars in Europe, this really was a fortuitous plan that Jefferson backed. The second part asks, was Louisiana purchase Jeffersonian or Hamiltonian? Well, yes, Jefferson did purchase it, but it was bad because Hamilton really was the genius behind giving us this bank that subsidized credit, but also gave foreign countries the ability to believe that we would pay back this loan. So without the Hamiltonian measures, we wouldn't have had a national bank that would have provided bonds, etc., in order to make this come together. Was this a strict or loose interpretation? It's a loose interpretation. And was it Federalist or Democratic Republican? But this is definitely a Federalist idea because of Hamilton's background. And the final question there is, how did this purchase impact migration? Well, essentially, because of this land, this enabled more citizens to move west. Going to the next page and the analysis question, we see, how did this purchase impact the multi-ethnic and multiracial makeup of the United States? Well, it certainly did bring in more American Indians. It helped Frenchmen to remain there, and also the Creoles coming up from the South. After being elected, next question, what did Thomas Jefferson do to reduce the influence of big government and the Federalists? Well, it repealed the Alien and Sedition Acts, number 1. Number 2, it reduced the size of the federal government and our military. And number 3, it repealed the excise taxes. The next question asks, who won the battle of political ideology, Jefferson and Madison or John Marshall? And explain your reasonings. Well, I have to suspect that it was Jefferson and Madison because their party basically outlasted the Federalists for numerous terms and numerous influence of sorts. So it asks the next question, what caused political parties on page 142 and 143, and what are the two prevailing views on why parties formed in the early republic? Well, essentially, it was really the differences in our classes and the personalities that those classes represented. So classes, call our class systems, and personalities. Yeah. The next question asks, what evidence from Jefferson's first term supports the Quid's assertion that he had abandoned the Democrat-Republican Party? Well, there were 3 things. Number 1, Louisiana Purchase. Number 2, the Embargo Act. And number 3, the Barbary Pirates. Don't know if I'll have time to lecture on that, but that certainly became a sticking point with one of Jefferson's failed attempts at helping. Going on to the next question on the next page, it asks, to what extent does the Burr controversy illustrate the impact of territorial expansion? Well, I think the struggle for power over these new territories really was, to a large extent, I think, the most important thing. The next question asks, to what extent does it illustrate conflict over politics? I think to a large extent, it says people sought power, which I think is what is the essence of politics. And to what extent does it illustrate insanity? Well, I would have to say a small extent, because the drive for power drove some of these people insane. The next question is dealing with the Constitution and this idea of treason. So it goes on and asks, explain why Burr was not guilty of treason in Marshall's view. Well, Marshall believed that he did not aid an enemy of the United States, and there was no witnesses to any such act. To what extent was Jefferson's foreign policy similar to those of Washington? And explain. Well, Jefferson was similar to those of Washington's, basically to a large extent, because both sought neutrality. Neutrality was the key benchmark for their legacies. The next question asks, to what extent was Jefferson's foreign policy successful in keeping the United States neutral? I think to a large extent, as the United States did not enter war under his watch. That happens following his watch, and there were some trigger points under his watch, but he did not go to war. And the last question on that page is, to what does the graph show on page 137? And the second part is, does the graph support some of your answers? Well, I think the graph shows the value of the United States dollar in other countries. I don't know if the graph kind of does support my answer, because it shows the struggles of the United States and what we went through because of Jefferson's foreign policy. So depending on how you answer the question, at least that's my take on it. Going on to the next page, it asks, was Madison's foreign policy more successful than Jefferson's? Why or why not? Well, Madison's foreign policy was not as successful because other countries, I think, took advantage of him and then declared war because of them working their political machinations kind of behind the scenes. The second question there on that page asks, explain the British and French viewpoint that neutrality does not always guarantee freedom of the seas. Well, trade with the enemy can be seen as helping the enemy because you're selling them goods. Doesn't matter if it's cotton or clothing to munitions, it still is aiding the other side. But the second key thing is that sea is under no one's jurisdiction. That's free to roam however you want and do with you wish. What are the three main causes of the War of 1812, and what was most significant? Explain your answer. Well, the continuous, I guess, problem in the United States is this that we've seen, is that because of these actions, it frustrated and angered the Americans, while at the same time, the key point is, at the same time, hurting the merchant class. I would sense that is, the key reasons as to, those problems. The next question is, was the United States justified in declaring war against Great Britain, and why or why not? I don't believe that the United States was justified, because if they just waited a little bit longer, been a little bit more patient, that Britain had already agreed to many of their demands that they ended up getting in that treaty, Ghent. So, yeah, if we had just been a little more patient, we wouldn't have had to go to that war like we did. On the map of page 139, what does it reveal about who supported the war? Well, those who generally supported the war were typically those on the frontier or those who bordered a foreign power, whether that be Canada or Quebec or those in the south with Mexico. The next question is, which point of opposition to Mr. Madison's war was the most significant to growing sectionalism? Remember, sectionalism is division of the North and the South. I'd have to say the New Englanders opposed most of its effect because of their economy, and this often encouraged this new sectionalism that we're going to begin seeing more and more happening that will lead to the Civil War. The next question is, why did so many Americans going back to the Declaration of Independence and Revolution believe annexing Canada was a natural expectation? Well, because Canada bordered United States and was a British territory before, and it had huge amounts of resources that this growing merchant class needed in order to expand and pursue their entrepreneurial endeavors. Next question is, what impact did battles and heroes and song lyrics have on our national identity during this time? Well, it grew our nationalism. Nationalism is really a pride in one's country. You have to realize that nationalism can easily grow into whether it be fascism or totalitarianism. Or going the other way, nationalism, initial step is patriotism, but how far is too far? But I digress. I'm sorry, it's 9:30, but it grew nationalism in the country as people became more proud and united behind one flag. And going on to the next page, it says, who won the war? The answer is simply no one won the war. List 3 reasons to support this view. Well, we can talk about that England returned all the conquered territory. Another thing is that there was, this no consensus of what to do. There was no impressment, blockades, or these maritime differences didn't seem to create any difficulties. And the third thing is that the United States recognized its boundary with Canada. Nothing was changed in that. Give one example of evidence to support the opposing point of view is that, British left behind the American Indians and relatively abandoned them in their moment of crisis. And the last question there is, why is the War of 1812 sometimes called the Second War for Independence? Well, because the United States gained the respect from Britain and many of the other foreign powers of standing up to England and their obvious greater power as a country. Well, that about wraps it up. Again, sorry for the lateness and delay, but I hope this was helpful. Go Bears!